A thug mocked a royal guard, confident the soldier wouldn't dare to respond. But when he raised his fist at an elderly veteran, the guard's silence broke in an instant. What happened next left the crowd stunned and the thug humiliated. The royal guard stood at his post, an unshakable figure of discipline and tradition. Dressed in his red tunic and iconic bearskin hat, he was the centre of attention, his stillness drawing awe from the crowd gathered around the palace gates. Tourists snapped photos, whispered among themselves, and marvelled at the unwavering composure of the soldier who seemed impervious to distraction. But the peaceful hum of the plaza was suddenly interrupted by the sound of loud, heavy footsteps. A man pushed his way through the crowd, his broad shoulders and confident swagger cutting an unmistakable path. People turned to look, their murmurs fading as the man's voice rang out, sharp and mocking. "Well, would you look at this guy?" The thug sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Standing there like some statue. What's the matter, big guy? Too scared to talk to me?" He was tall and stocky, his unkempt clothes and rough demeanour a stark contrast to the polished tourists around him. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, like a predator searching for prey. His eyes locked onto the guard, with a mix of amusement and challenge, and a smirk curled at the corner of his mouth. The crowd's energy shifted. Parents pulled their children closer, while others exchanged nervous glances. Some stepped back instinctively, unsure of what the man intended. But the royal guard didn't move. His gaze remained fixed forward, his body as still and steady as ever. The thug took a step closer, his voice rising. "Oh, I see how it is. You think you're better than the rest of us, huh? Hiding behind that uniform, pretending you're something special." He began to circle the guard, his movements slow and deliberate, like a lion stalking its prey. "But you're not better. You're just a puppet. A statue in a funny hat. What are you even protecting, huh? Nothing." The crowd held their breath, their eyes darting between the thug and the guard. A few brave souls reached for their phones, recording the scene as it unfolded. The tension was thick, and yet the guard remained completely still, his silence unbroken. The thug laughed, the sound harsh and grating against the uneasy quiet of the plaza. "Come on, man, say something. Or are you not allowed to talk? Is that it? You're just here to stand around and look pretty for the tourists." He leaned in, his face inches from the guards, his voice dropping to a taunting whisper. "Pathetic." The guard didn't so much as blink. His stillness, meant to convey discipline and resolve, only seemed to enrage the thug further. "Oh, you think you're tough, don't you?" the man shouted, stepping back and gesturing dramatically toward the crowd. "Look at this guy. Everyone's acting like he's some kind of hero. But me, I see through it. He's nothing, just a guy who gets paid to stand still." The crowd stirred uneasily, their whispers growing louder. A few voices rose in quiet protest. "Leave him alone. What's your problem?" But the thug ignored them. His focus was entirely on the guard, his smirk widening as he took another step closer. "What's the matter, soldier boy?" he sneered. "Can't handle the truth? Come on, show me something. You can't just stand there like a mute forever. Do something." He jabbed a finger into the guard's shoulder, hard enough to make a few people in the crowd gasp. But the guard remained motionless, his silence unyielding. The thug laughed again, louder this time, throwing his arms wide as if performing for the audience. "See this? This is your big hero," he declared, his voice dripping with mockery. "Doesn't even have the guts to stand up for himself. What a joke!" The plaza had gone eerily quiet, save for the thug's taunts. Every eye was on the scene, the tension in the air almost unbearable. Some in the crowd whispered nervously, debating whether to step in, but no one moved. The thug's smirk widened. The guard's refusal to react only seemed to embolden him. "You're nothing," he said, his voice low and venomous. "And I'm going to make sure everyone here knows it." The thug's mocking laughter echoed through the plaza, cutting through the thick silence that had fallen over the crowd. Tourists stood frozen, their eyes glued to the confrontation unfolding before them. Some gripped their phones tightly, recording every moment, while others exchanged anxious whispers, uncertain of how far this would go. The thug, emboldened by the guard's lack of response, took another step closer. He jabbed his finger into the guard's chest, his smirk twisting into something darker. "What's the matter, huh? You just gonna stand there? You're not even man enough to defend yourself?" Still, the guard remained motionless. His gaze didn't waver, his posture unbroken. It was as if the thug didn't exist, as if his insults and taunts were nothing more than the wind passing through the square. The lack of reaction only fueled the thug's frustration. He paced in front of the guard like a caged animal, gesturing wildly and raising his voice. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Standing there all stiff like you're made of stone. But I see through you. You're just a coward hiding behind that stupid uniform." The crowd murmured uneasily. A few brave voices called out, "Leave him alone!" But the thug ignored them, his focus entirely on the guard. He leaned in again, his voice dropping to a taunting whisper. "You don't scare me. You're not some untouchable hero. You're nothing." He stepped back and let out a loud, mocking laugh, turning to address the crowd as if he were performing on stage. "Look at this guy. You all came here to see a soldier, didn't you? A man of honor? Well, here he is, letting me walk all over him. Some hero." The tension in the plaza was palpable. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering for them to look away. Older tourists shook their heads in disapproval, while younger ones recorded the scene with wide eyes. The air felt heavy, as though the entire crowd was holding its collective breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. The thug wasn't done. He reached out again, this time shoving the guard's shoulder with enough force to make the crowd gasp. The guard's body shifted slightly with the push, but he didn't react. His silence was a fortress, impenetrable and resolute. "Oh, so you're just going to take that, huh?" the thug sneered. "What's the matter? Too scared to fight back?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder. A few people began to move closer, their concern outweighing their fear. One woman whispered to her husband, "Someone needs to stop this. What if he gets violent?" But before anyone could intervene, the thug raised his voice again, turning his anger into a spectacle. "You're pathetic," he spat, his tone dripping with venom. "You don't deserve the respect people give you. You're just a statue, a puppet on display for the tourists. That's all you are." He reached out again, this time knocking the guard's bearskin hat askew. The crowd gasped audibly, the sight of the guard's disrupted uniform feeling like a breach of some sacred boundary. Even the thug seemed momentarily surprised by his own boldness, but he quickly recovered, laughing loudly. "Look at that," he shouted, pointing at the guard's hat. "Not so perfect now, are you? Maybe you're not as untouchable as you think." The guard remained silent, his posture unyielding even as the hat shifted slightly on his head. His stillness was unbroken, but the air around him crackled with tension. The thug's laughter faltered as the silence stretched on. He paced in front of the guard, his movements growing more erratic, his taunts losing some of their edge. "Come on, man," he muttered, almost to himself. "Say something! Do something!" But the guard didn't move. Frustrated, the thug turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "You see this? This is your big hero. He's nothing. He won't even defend himself." The crowd remained quiet, their unease palpable. The tension had reached a boiling point, and yet the guard's silence remained unbroken, his presence a silent testament to discipline and resolve. But for the thug, it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to break something or someone. And if the guard wouldn't give him what he wanted, he'd find someone else who would. The thug's taunts rang out across the plaza, his voice growing louder and more hostile as he sought to provoke a reaction. The crowd remained frozen, some whispering nervously while others looked away, unsure how to intervene. For a moment, it seemed as though no one would step forward to stop the escalating situation. Then, cutting through the tense silence, a calm but firm voice spoke. "That's enough." The thug turned sharply, his smirk faltering for a split second as he searched for the source of the interruption. An older man emerged from the crowd, his steps deliberate and steady. He wasn't tall, nor particularly imposing, but there was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself. His silver hair glinted in the sunlight, and the lines on his face spoke of years of experience, years that had clearly shaped a man of strength and resolve. The crowd shifted, their focus momentarily drawn away from the thug and toward this unexpected figure. The man stopped a few feet away from the thug, his posture straight and his voice steady as he repeated, "That's enough." The thug let out a bark of laughter, the tension in his face replaced by mockery. "Oh, great! Now we've got Grandpa coming to the rescue," he jeered, turning to the crowd with an exaggerated shrug. "What's next? A marching band?" The veteran didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on the thug, unyielding and calm. "You're making a fool of yourself," he said simply. "Leave the man alone. He's doing his duty." The thug's smirk twisted into a sneer. "Doing his duty? By standing there like a statue? Please!" He gestured toward the guard with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This guy isn't doing anything. He's just a prop for tourists to gawk at." The veteran took another step forward, his calm demeanor unwavering. "You don't know the first thing about what it takes to stand there," he said. "The discipline, the training, the responsibility. You see a man in a uniform, but you don't see the sacrifice behind it." The thug's expression darkened, his bravado flickering for a moment before he stepped closer to the veteran. "And who do you think you are, huh?" he growled. "You think you're better than me because you've got a big mouth and some fancy words." The veteran met the thug's gaze evenly, his voice quiet but firm. "I know what it means to serve, to protect, and to respect those who do. That's something you clearly don't understand." The crowd murmured softly, a few nodding in agreement. The veteran's words carried a weight that cut through the thug's arrogance, leaving the plaza in a tense silence. But the thug wasn't done. His face twisted with anger, and he stepped closer, towering over the older man. "You think you're tough, old man?" he snarled. "Maybe you need to be taught a lesson about sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." The veteran stood his ground, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. "Violence doesn't make you strong," he said calmly. "It makes you weak." The thug let out a low growl, his fists clenching at his sides. "Weak, huh?" he muttered. "I'll show you weak." Before anyone could react, the thug raised his arm, his fist aimed at the veteran's face. The older man's breath caught, his body instinctively flinching as he braced for the blow. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath as time seemed to slow. Parents shielded their children's eyes, and several onlookers shouted, "No!" But the punch never landed. In a blur of motion, the royal guard broke character. His hand shot out, intercepting the thug's fist mid-air with a precision that left the crowd stunned. The guard's grip was like iron, his calm demeanor unbroken even as the tension in the plaza reached its peak. The veteran opened his eyes, blinking in shock. Standing in front of him now was the royal guard, his tall, imposing figure shielding the older man from harm. His hand held the thug's fist in an unyielding grip, and the look in his eyes spoke of quiet authority and unwavering resolve. The thug struggled against the guard's hold, his earlier confidence now replaced with frustration and fear. "What the—" he stammered, his voice trembling. The guard's voice, low and steady, cut through the chaos. "That's enough!" The plaza fell silent, every eye fixed on the guard as he stepped forward, forcing the thug back with controlled, deliberate movements. The crowd erupted into murmurs of disbelief and admiration, their phones raised high to capture the moment. The veteran took a shaky step back, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. The guard didn't respond, his focus locked on the thug. His grip tightened just slightly as he said, "You've crossed the line, this ends now." The thug, still struggling, looked around as if searching for support from the crowd, but all he found were disapproving stares. His bravado had all but disappeared, replaced by panic as he struggled against the guard's unyielding grip. His face twisted in frustration, and he tugged at his arm, but it was like trying to move a steel beam. The royal guard's hand remained locked around the thug's wrist, his strength a quiet but undeniable force. The crowd, frozen moments earlier, now erupted into murmurs and whispers. "Did you see that?" someone said, their voice tinged with awe. "He stopped it like it was nothing." Phones were raised higher, capturing every second of the guard's calm yet commanding presence. The thug tried to regain some semblance of control, baring his teeth in an attempt to intimidate. "Let me go," he spat, his voice laced with desperation. "You're not supposed to move. You're just a statue, a decoration. You don't have the right to touch me." The guard's expression didn't change. His voice, when it came, was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of authority. "My duty is to protect," he said, his eyes fixed on the thug. "And that includes protecting the people around me, from people like you." With a swift, practiced motion, the guard released the thug's wrist, but only long enough to reposition himself. He stepped forward, gripping the thug's arm and twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. The thug yelped, his knees buckling as the guard applied just enough pressure to force him into a kneeling position. The crowd gasped, their earlier unease giving way to admiration. Some began to clap softly, their respect for the guard evident in their expressions. "Get off me!" the thug shouted, his voice cracking as he squirmed against the hold. "You can't do this!" The guard leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "I gave you every chance to stop," he said. "You ignored the warnings. Now you'll face the consequences of your actions." The thug's struggles grew weaker, his earlier confidence completely shattered. His head hung low, his voice trembling as he muttered, "This isn't fair." The guard didn't flinch. He stood tall and resolute, holding the thug in place with controlled precision. He wasn't angry, nor did he appear vengeful. His actions were measured, purposeful, and above all, professional. As the thug knelt on the ground, subdued and humiliated, the guard addressed him directly, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You think strength is about shouting the loudest? About picking on those who can't fight back? That's not strength, that's cowardice." The thug didn't respond, his face hidden as he stared at the ground. "True strength," the guard continued, "is about knowing when to act and when to hold back. It's about standing firm in the face of provocation without losing control. It's about protecting others, not tearing them down." The crowd, silent until now, erupted into applause. A few people shouted, "Well said," while others nodded in agreement. The energy in the plaza shifted, admiration replacing the earlier tension. The veteran, who had been watching from a few steps away, stepped forward. His voice, though shaky, carried gratitude and respect. "You didn't have to do this," he said to the guard, his words trembling with emotion. "But you did. You stepped in when I needed help. Thank you for protecting me and for showing all of us what real honor looks like." The guard gave a small nod, his expression as composed as ever. His focus, however, remained on the thug. The subdued man looked up finally, his face red with a mix of shame and anger. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. The guard didn't blink. "This isn't about being better," he said. "It's about doing what's right. And what's right is ensuring people like you can't hurt anyone else." As the guard held the thug in place, 2 palace security officers appeared, alerted by the commotion. They quickly assessed the situation, their eyes widening slightly at the sight of the subdued man and the royal guard standing over him. One of the officers stepped forward, nodding respectfully to the guard. "We'll take it from here," he said. The guard released the thug's arm, his movements deliberate and controlled. The thug winced as he was pulled to his feet by the security officers, his earlier defiance completely drained. The crowd began to cheer, clapping loudly as the thug was escorted away. Some shouted words of thanks to the guard, while others recorded the moment on their phones. The thug struggled briefly against the officers, but quickly realized it was futile. His head hung low as he was led through the parting crowd, their disapproving stares following him until he disappeared from view. As the plaza settled, the energy shifted to one of reverence and admiration. The crowd began to disperse, but not without sharing their thoughts aloud. "That was incredible," a man said, shaking his head in awe. "He didn't even break a sweat." "He didn't lose his temper either," a woman added. "That's real strength." The veteran lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the royal guard. He stepped forward one last time, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You reminded all of us what it means to stand for something. Thank you." The guard didn't respond. He returned to his post, resuming his stoic stance, as though nothing had happened. Within seconds, he was motionless again, the very picture of discipline and composure. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plaza. The royal palace stood as it always had, majestic, timeless, and unwavering. The royal guard resumed his post, his bright red tunic pristine, his tall bearskin hat now perfectly adjusted. To the unknowing eye, it seemed as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He was still and silent, a sentinel of discipline and duty. But for those who had witnessed the events of the day, the guard was no longer just a symbol. He was a man who had stepped beyond tradition to protect someone in need. The confrontation between the thug and the guard had left an indelible mark on everyone present, a reminder of what it truly meant to serve with honor and strength. As the crowd dispersed, their voices carried snippets of admiration and reflection. "I'll never forget that," a young woman said to her friend, clutching her phone. "He didn't just stand there, he protected that man without ever losing his cool." Her friend nodded, glancing back at the guard. It wasn't just about strength. It was the way he handled it. So calm, so composed. That's what real heroes do. Nearby, a father knelt down to speak to his son, who had watched the entire scene in wide-eyed awe. "Did you see how brave he was?" the father asked. The boy nodded, his voice filled with wonder. "He didn't even get mad, Dad. He just stopped the bad guy like it was nothing." The father smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's because real strength isn't about anger, it's about control. Remember that." Even those who had initially been hesitant to get involved now found themselves inspired. A middle-aged man turned to his wife as they walked away, shaking his head. "I didn't think he'd move. I thought he'd just stand there and take it." "But he didn't," the wife replied. "And he didn't just defend himself. He protected someone else. That's what makes him a true royal guard." The veteran lingered in the plaza long after most of the crowd had dispersed. He stood quietly, his eyes fixed on the guard who had saved him. The weight of the moment settled over him as he thought about what had happened. For years, he had carried the scars of his own service, both physical and emotional. He had fought battles, seen loss, and endured more than most people could imagine. But today, standing in the shadow of the palace, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The guard's actions weren't just a demonstration of strength. They were a testament to discipline, courage, and a deep sense of duty. The veteran felt humbled and grateful. His respect for the royal guard solidified in a way he hadn't expected. With a final glance at the guard, the veteran turned and walked away, his steps lighter than they had been in years. In the face of aggression and mockery, the royal guard stood firm, not for himself, but for those who couldn't stand alone. His actions reminded everyone that true strength isn't loud or boastful. It doesn't seek attention or applause. True strength is calm, deliberate, and rooted in the courage to do what's right, even when no one else will. The guard's silence spoke volumes that day, but his actions shouted even louder. In a world filled with noise, his discipline, honour, and selfless protection left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. What did you think of the Royal Guard's actions? Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for what's right in such a calm and powerful way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of honour, resilience, and courage. Until next time, remember, real strength is quiet, deliberate, and always in service of others.